John, are you ready? Let's give it a warm welcome, He's sorted, he's got his mic. But thank you. And so for those of you that are new, we just honor this man as probably the chief theologian amongst us. And I have to admit, I'm praying for the double portion from you. May I be your Elisha to your Elijah. But we're excited for part 2 of, is it the glory of God today?
Not quite there. We're not quite there. I have to say a bit more about the God of glory. But anyway, thank you.
Classic theologian, there's always more to say.
For these 2 Sundays, last Sunday we started to unpack the God of glory, and that's been wonderfully reflected and helpfully reflected in our worship this morning. What I want to do is that I want to finish that off and say some other thoughts which I didn't have time to share. And then I want to take the second half and transition you from thinking about the God of glory to begin to prepare you to think about the glory of God. And then I've been asked to preach again in 3 weeks' time. So in 3 weeks' time, I'm going to take up that theme of the glory of God. Those things I said I would talk to you about this week, I haven't forgotten, and I haven't sort of run away from those things, but I will talk them through with you, and the question of spiritual intimacy and how we feel about that, and what we can do to help us see the glory of God. So that will be some way a little further on. And I'm not going to do this now, but I did think that, wow, how you could end a series like this off by talking about predestined for glory. You know, because the Bible doesn't say you and I are just destined for glory. It doesn't. In Ephesians 1 and Romans 8, it says we are predestined for glory. Yes. Wow. Yes, it's great to say yes, because people sometimes get very frightened about the doctrine of predestination. And when rightly understood, it's a wonderful truth that we are predestined for glory. Another sort of rabbit just to catch hold of from last week that ran away from us, and that was I mentioned the phrase, we are too familiar with God, with the God we hardly know. And one of our fairly frequent visitors, I don't know whether he's here today, but Luke Skywalker, wonderful name, is it Luke Skywalker? He is, I can see him. He's with us. Wonderful name to have, isn't it, Luke? Bless you. He told me that we are too familiar with the God we hardly know, was quoted and often quoted by a guy called Bobby Connor. And some of you will, I think, be familiar or know his name. Okay, we're on to thinking a little bit further about the God of glory. And I ended up last time by saying that if you love the God of glory, only God could bring that about in you. And I believe loving a God of glory is the result of a supernatural work of the Spirit of God, that the world, the flesh, and the devil cannot bring that about in your life. And then we finish by saying, well, how much of our lives and our ministry and our praying and our relationships, how much do they evidence the glory of God and show to others that we are being shaped by this glorious reality? Now, in the light of God's glory, we have no claim on God. Let me just repeat that again. In the light of God's glory, we have no claim on God. The truth is, God's claim is on you and me. He owns us. He doesn't owe us anything. He owns us. And this is the polar opposite kind of thinking which is widespread in our community and society today. And it's also found in the evangelical and charismatic church as well. None of us have the right to feel that we can snap our fingers at God in prayer or at God in some other time and expect God to jump and suddenly turn up and do what we want him to do. Our approach, particularly when we come to God in prayer and ministry, must always be with the view of asking for mercy. And no matter how long we have been a Christian, no matter how long we have known God, we are always and still always need God's mercy. Now, I want to talk about Joshua. And Joshua, you remember, was Moses' successor. And he learned a very sobering truth about God. And he witnessed the scary, the unexpected manifestation of God's glory, you remember, shortly before leading the children of Israel fully into Canaan. And if you know the opening chapters of the book of Joshua, you'll remember there that a man with a drawn sword appeared to Joshua, and he said to this man, "Are you for us, or are you for our adversaries?" That's a very interesting question, wasn't it? It was a very reasonable question to ask. Hey, I'm just going into battle. I see this man with this sword drawn, and to ask him now, whose side are you on? Are you on our side? Are you on the people of God's side? Or are you on the enemy side? Now, you will know, if you know your Bibles, that the answer the man gave was no. Now, has that ever struck you as being strange? Surely it makes no sense if the commander of the Lord's armies was not on Joshua's side. But the commander of the Lord's armies doesn't say he's on Joshua's side, does he? He says, I'm not on either side. And Joshua was having to learn one of the most difficult, and I believe one of the most profound lessons, and also one of the most offensive lessons of the nature of the true God. That God is a God of glory, and he exists for his own glory. He wants our praise, he wants our worship, he wants our honor, he wants our adulation. He is unashamedly a jealous God. And we said last week, his name is jealous. And because he is like that, he is on nobody's side. The side he is with is himself. Now, this is a hard truth, and some people really balk at this. He means he sides with his sovereign will. If you ask who God is on the side of and who he sides with, simply and plainly, it is his sovereign will. And I've noticed that over the years that this thing that God is a God of glory and is on nobody's side often seems to put people off believing in the God of the Bible. And they find it quite offensive. And one woman I can remember, I must have been speaking and lecturing on this, and she came up to me and she said, "John, what you said was horrible." So I'm used to having people disagree with what I've said. So there wasn't much I could say to that. But what Joshua would discover about God is the polar opposite of the teaching that always seems to play into the area of people's feelings and people's sense of entitlement. And I'm trying to put the other side of that because the Bible stresses the other side of it. And so often we want all that we hear from the preaching and the teaching of God's word to be that seems to fit into my thinking about what I'm entitled to from God. And that is all wrong. The Bible speaks often about the fear of God, but I think the fear of God to many people is of a person who wouldn't even hurt a flea. And Revelation 14:7 says, fear God and give him glory. So let's be very careful that we don't create the God who we are comfortable with, who we find likable. Okay? Because that doesn't mean we go off at a tangent, become odd and strange in what we believe. But sometimes we don't get the balance right. And we always want a God who we decide what he is like. Now, no person, and I accept this, would ever dream of loving a jealous God. Would they? Would anybody just dream of loving a jealous God? A God who exists for his own glory and only for his own glory? But you see, if you love the God of glory, you will love the will of God, whatever it is for you. And if you do that, then that will give you a tremendous sense of assurance that God has done a supernatural work in your heart. And loving the glory of God and loving the will of God is to me really there at the pinnacle of assurance that I am a child of God. I hope you're following with me this morning, because these are very big and important truths. And you see, the flesh and the world and the devil never gets involved in giving me a love for the glory of God. But when you discover that this is who God is, and this is what he is like, and then you go on to love him and adore him and worship him, it means that you know that you are a genuine born-again believer. You just know it. Now, the chief reason the Jews in the Gospels missed their own Messiah, you remember that, was because they had lost their respect for the God of glory. The respect that they should have had for the God of glory and for his son, the Messiah, that love had diminished. And it had diminished to the point that they just got concerned about one another and into a spirit of a mutual acceptance of one another. You scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. They did not believe that Jesus was the Messiah because they had a diminished sense of the glory of God. And so Jesus comes along in John's Gospel and he says, I'll tell you why you've got a diminished sense of the glory of God. How can you believe when you receive glory from one another and do not seek the glory that comes from the only God? That's an amazing verse, isn't it? How can you believe when you receive glory from one another and do not seek the glory that comes from God? Now, think about that one. You and I, as much as it lies within us, must renounce our love affair with the glory that comes from other people. Human glory, worldly glory. And by very nature, you and I find that we have a love affair with human glory. We want it. We want people to shower us with it. And that is a love affair that we need to break. Because if we don't break it, we will never know what I'm talking about now, about the God of glory and the glory of God. All of us were born loving ourselves, loving other people, giving us glory and acknowledgement. So let's renounce that. A God of glory was the God who Joshua encountered. And he found that when he encountered that God, he was on holy ground. And so he took off his sandals and he worshipped God, just as his predecessor Moses had done, you remember, in the wilderness, in the beginning and opening chapters of the book of Exodus. It's when you realize God is like that, that you have the experience of being on holy ground. I think the experience of holy ground is one of the most awesome places to be in your walk with God and in your experience of God. And sometimes we've got the wrong end of the stick here. And we think when we're necessarily jumping around and they're doing all those things and swinging from the chandeliers and doing all our acrobatics, and I'm not against that. You know, when you get too old, I'm just relieved I can't do it, you know. But there we are. But holy ground in the Bible is where men and women had an encounter with the God who really is. Awesome indeed that he was like that. Now, let me tell you about Enoch as well. You remember Enoch, before he was translated up into heaven, had this commendation, the Bible says. Simple. Enoch, he pleased God. From the book of Hebrews 11. It does not say that Enoch pleased his friends. It does not say that Enoch pleased his enemies. It doesn't say that Enoch pleased his parents even. It does say that he pleased God. And I wonder, has God given you a burning desire to please him? That is a level of devotion to God that I think a lot of us miss. Now, where's the level of your devotion to God this morning? Would God give you the commendation? Would God give me the commendation that I pleased him? I think that's really there at the top, isn't it? Of Christian living and dedication towards God and worship of God. That God can say, your name, you pleased me. You please me. What a thing to aim for. And I think that's one of the highest standards that we could possibly have. Where the approval of God is infinitely more satisfying to us than the praise and the acceptance of other people. That's what I'm talking about, Enoch. You may have thought, where's the connection with Joshua there and Moses? But I think there is a connection there. That what gives us the most infinite satisfaction over and above the praise and the acceptance of other people is that witness of the Spirit, that we know that God is pleased with us. There's no higher goal that you can go out from here this morning and say, God, I want to please you. Above everything else, God, I want to please you. I want the satisfaction way, way, way above the praise of other people that I please you. Okay. There are two things, I think, that the incident of Moses and Joshua teach us. And I know I've been here before with you many months ago, but I want to go there again and say something more and tie it in with the glory of God. When you think of those holy ground experiences of Joshua and Moses, the first thing is that there are some things God does not want us to figure out. Okay? There are some things that God does not want us to figure out. And secondly, we must worship God despite not being able to figure out what we would clearly love to figure out. Okay? I'm relieved in one sense that God doesn't want us to know everything. Don't you find that a relief? God doesn't want us to know everything. God wants us to realize that we can know for sure what he has chosen to make clear to us. Okay, you're following me? What God has made clear to us. And God knows what is best for you and for me to know. Now, in all this knowing, we cannot twist God's arm behind his back and get him to tell us things that he doesn't want to tell us. We need to know something, then God will reveal that when we need to know it. Not 2 or 3 months before we need to know it. Because we don't need to know it then, so why should he tell us? He will reveal what we need to know when we know it. You remember Jesus' encounter with his disciples is very helpful in understanding this point. Jesus told his disciples he had many things to reveal to them. But then what did he say? They couldn't bear them. Yeah. Okay? Well, at least not then. They couldn't bear them. Now, the problem with many of us is that we are just like the disciples of Jesus. We have no objectivity about ourselves, you know? Now, those of you who come regularly here will know a few months ago we were looking at Romans 12, and there's a little lovely chunk paragraph in the middle there of Paul's letter, which really helps us get a correct and a biblical objectivity about ourselves. But the disciples didn't have a true objectivity about themselves. And often Christians today don't have it either, and it's a real problem. I think what we feel, and it's more than what we feel, I think Christians rather fancy themselves in this, that God is ready to reveal to me a level of truth, new truth, doctrinal truth, or call me to a new sense of obedience to him that I've never given him obedience in that area before, that he's just waiting to do that for me. I don't find the New Testament backs that idea up at all. When Jesus asked the disciples if they were able to be baptized with his baptism, you know what they did? They jumped up and down and they said, see, I can jump up and down. They did say, yes, we are able. Yes, we are able to be baptized with the baptism that you've been or going to be baptized with. And the truth was, Jesus said, you are not able. You are not able for that truth at this particular time. And of course, when Jesus was taken from the Garden of Gethsemane, they all ran off and left him. Jesus was quite right. They forsook him. They had no true objectivity about themselves. Now, you remember in Exodus 3, Moses saw that burning bush and it wasn't consumed. And he thought, I'll get closer and look at this bush and find out why it isn't disintegrating and burning up and becoming a pile of ashes. Now, I think if you and I had been there, I think we would have liked to know the same thing. You know, we would say, oh, what's this bush burning for? I'll go over and have a look. Moses was only a few meters away from God, or from the bush, when God said, stop. God said, Moses, stop. Don't come any closer. Take your shoes off. You're on holy ground. You and I cannot get one bit closer to God than God allows. See, you and I think we can just walk into his presence and get as close as we want to be and as what we would like to be at that particular moment. But you and I can't get as close to God as unless he allows us to that. You remember later the children of Israel were commanded, as they were crossing the Jordan, they were commanded to stay 900 meters away from the Ark of the Covenant as it was being carried by the Levites over the River Jordan. 900 meters away. And what was the Ark of the Covenant a symbol of? The Ark of the Covenant was a symbol of God's glory. And God said, tell my people they must be 900 meters back from my glory. The burning bush meant, I think, that you and I need to have a word of caution from implying that we have a close relationship with God if what we're trying to do is impress other people with our spirituality and how spiritual we are. Do you know what the worst kind of name dropping is? Do you know what the worst kind of name dropping is? I believe the worst is to use God's name in order to enhance people's esteem of you. And I think those in the prophetic ministry, that is a red-hot temptation over the use of the phrase, God told me. I'm not saying, hear me correctly here, I'm not saying we shouldn't use that phrase. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying when we use it to try and enhance another person's esteem of me, that I have some close relationship that they don't know, and therefore I know what God's prophetic word is for you, is name dropping of the worst possible kind. Actually, I think, God told me, that phrase, it will be good to examine that again at some other date and have a fresh look at that in the light of the God of glory. Now, God's saying to Moses, stop. There are things that in my own experience I have tried to figure out. And I'm glad at this age now that God said to me, stop. 3 things. 1, I've tried to figure out what is the difference between what God predestinates and what he allows. And God said, John, stop. Don't try to figure that out, because I will not allow you to figure it out. Have you got it? God said, I will not allow you to figure it out. Second thing, why did God create human beings knowing we would suffer? Stop. Don't try to figure that out. What is the difference between God knowing the future without causing it? Okay? Stop. Don't try to figure that out. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. That is an amazing verse. Some of us have very sort of inquiring minds, and we have to be very careful with that. Very, very careful. Let's use that gift from God, yes, to make sure that we have understood the scriptures correctly, but understood what God wants us to understand, and when he wants us to understand it in his time. And then it becomes a holy ground experience. I must tell you that you need a little break here and breathing space. I have a curious thing about Christianity. There's one thing that I have always found to be curious about Christianity, and it's this. And if you don't understand, don't worry about it. But it's this, that an immaterial and entirely spiritual God created a thoroughly material and physical world. Do you understand? Yep. I think that should surprise us more than it does. I think that, for me, is a wow moment, you know? And when we get to heaven, I'll know the answer to it then, so I won't have to bother to ask God how he reconciled all that. But it's curious. I put it in on the back burner of my sort of biblical curiosity, you know? Okay. What I think all that means is that you and I need to pray regularly a prayer like this. Help me, Father, to see what you want me to see, to believe what you want me to believe, to grasp what you want me to understand, and to be content with what you have chosen and not chosen for me. And that is a contentment with the will of the God of glory. Now, you and I may think that we have the right motives in our wanting to know more about God. I think we have to be very careful that we don't find ourselves trying to control God. And our motives for knowing him and for knowing him better are often so subtle because our thoughts are not his thoughts and his ways are not our ways, that we can often think the way we do because we want to control God in what he allows and what he ordains in my life at any given moment. You know, God will not let us control him. Never. He never will. We can get no closer to God than God would allow. Now, you want to come back to me at that point. You can say, well, you talked at the beginning last week about knowing God, of having a close relationship with God. And, you know, James promises us that if we draw near to God, then he will draw near to us. I think a close relationship with God will be evidenced by our willingness to forsake or to give up any claim on God. That is what happens when we get close to God. We give up any claim on God himself because something else has filled us and taken over from us. And I think this is so important, that we need to love the will of God. There is something that will happen to you that if you begin through that supernatural work of the Spirit and the fruit of the Spirit of God living within you, if you begin to love the glory of God, there is another truth that parallel that you will love as well, and that is the will of God. If you love the glory of God, you will love the will of God, whatever that will is for you at any given moment. That's the peak of being close to God, of loving his glory and loving the will of God and what his purposes really are. You know, John in his gospel says this in the early chapter there, chapter 2, I think. Jesus did not need any testimony about mankind, for he knew what was in man. That's well worth thinking about. God didn't need any other testimony or commendation or word whispered in his ear about what we're like, about what mankind is like. He knew what was in man. He knows what is in us, in each of us. He knows what he needs to reveal to us when it needs to be revealed. And because he knows us like that, and he knows what is in us, then all things he does at the right time. And because he is a God of glory, and we believe that he is a God of glory, and we believe in the will of God, you know, he will never, never, never let you or me share his glory with somebody else. And if you don't get that issue sorted out in your life, then you're going to have a very bouncy and rugged Christian experience. And a lot of stumped toes and cut knees and everything else and broken ankles. Because you'll be climbing where God didn't say climb. And you'll be thinking yourself more spiritual than you really are. And you'll be falling flat on your face because you've lost any objectivity about yourself. And to make up for those things, you will then start name dropping about God to enhance your ministry and get the worship and praise and adulation of the Christians that you mix with in the circle that you circulate round. God never gives his glory to anyone else. Now let me finish. Do you have difficulties with a God like that? I can honestly say I understand if you do. I can honestly say that. For he is more mysterious than we will ever grasp while we are here on this earth. You know, I believe that. He is more mysterious than we will ever grasp while we live on this planet. And secondly, he is greater than anything that can be said about him. Okay? What I've tried to say this morning, is just scratching. You know, do that here on the lectern. I haven't made any difference to the lectern at all, and as far as that goes, you know. He's greater than any words we can speak. I think that should thrill us. Rightly understood, I think we should be thrilled. And rightly understood, that means we have been standing on holy ground. And as I said a little while ago, I don't think there's anything more awesome than to be standing or sitting or lying on holy ground. And I think prophetic people need to wait on God a lot more and be less quick to speak. Okay. I haven't even got on to helping you to make the transition from now there to the glory of God. But I will go back to there because there really is something very important about the glory of God and sin. So we've got to go into that. We've got to delve into that next time. But I want to leave with you, so we won't see each other for 3 weeks. Well, not in me up here. I want to leave with you a question, if I even wrote it down on this. Oh, yes, it is on this sheet of paper. And the question is this. What is the greatest thing a person can do? Now, I'll give you 3 weeks to think about that. What is the greatest thing a person can do? And I want you to think around these past 2 sermons. Okay, got it? What is the greatest thing a person can do? Okay, and we'll come back and take that up next time. Do you want me to pray, or do you want to pray? Okay, let's talk to God. Father, I trembled a bit, actually, because I realize I've spoken an enormous number of words about you this morning. And every single one of them I have spoken in your presence. And you have heard every one. Father, what has been rubbish, then please take out of our minds and out of our hearts. And what has been your word to us at this time, when we most needed it, may we have ears to hear. For Jesus' sake. Amen.
Wow. So I think in light of what Pastor John has preached, which is weighty and powerful, I think give somebody a hug. Maybe go out for lunch and kind of verbally process that. You know, if you need to confess, actually, I have name dropped Jesus and I don't want to do that in my future. Do that as well. But thank you so much for coming to Power Church. There's still teas and coffees at the back. But again, just loiter and linger for a little bit in the space and allow what's just been said to wash over you. And let's not miss this moment, this invitation to really let the fear of the Lord take root and take hold in our hearts. But we love you guys, and we'll see you next Sunday. I don't think there's anything this week. Enjoy the school holidays and break. There is, I realized, a Freedom from Fear Day coming up on the 12th of November, which is again going to be a day of healing and deliverance. So if you'd like to be part of team, send me an email, or if you'd like to join and participate, you can find the information on our website and book in via Eventbrite. But yes, if not, we'll see you next Sunday.